Should say, although we have everything purple up here and it's still Lent, we're also in the season of green. As you look out at the parking lot out there at all of our cars, the joy of yellow snow in Houston, a wonderful thing, isn't it? We've been talking about what it means for us to dream God's dream, to talk about the kingdom of God, as Jesus used parables to talk about it, as a vision of what Dr. Martin Luther King called a beloved community that we are called to in the here and the now. And we talked first about the mustard seed, what it means for us to dream bigger, to plant small seeds of love and kindness and generosity and mercy in the world, that like the mustard tree, they might grow exponentially in unexpected ways. We talked about how God is not fair, thanks be to God, and all are invited into God's kingdom, just as the laborers in the vineyard were paid at different times and invited into the same wonderful feast. And finally, last week we talked about how lost things matter, coins and sheep and people. We talked about how in the beloved community, everyone is of infinite worth, how the irrational love that we are called to invites us into this relationship together. Today we're going to turn to another story, but first, a moment that perhaps we've all experienced, those uncomfortable public moments, those awkward moments in public. Say you're in an airport and someone's yelling at the ticket taker, right? As some of us perhaps experienced over spring break. Perhaps in a grocery store, someone with a crying child, someone struggling with their groceries in the parking lot, someone by the side of the road trying to flag down help. This last weekend, Layla and I went to Barnes & Noble because Pastor needs more books. And Layla was upstairs and I was downstairs, and we both heard the same thing, a child crying. Not quite fair. A child screaming as if their fingernails were being pulled out. And not like for a moment, right? But for 5 and 10 and 15 minutes. And I saw them walk by. And you ask yourself, perhaps in moments like this, should I do something? Is this really my responsibility to intervene? Will I make it better or worse? Shouldn't someone else really deal with this? What will happen to me if I get involved? Those awkward public moments. Jesus tells a story about exactly that moment. He tells a story of the Good Samaritan, a story that we know pretty well. Lawyer asks, right, who is my neighbor? And he's not, right, trying to figure out who he should love. He's doing the opposite. He's trying to figure out who he can ignore, who he can safely not love. Not who he should include, but who he can exclude. Where does my responsibility stop? And like any good teacher, Jesus doesn't answer his question, but instead tells a story. He tells a story about, right, the priest, the good religious person, the pastor, the church council member, the Bible study leader who walks by on the other side, goes on his way. He tells a story about a Levite, the city council member, the upstanding citizen, the police officer who crosses by on the other side. And we say to ourselves, thank God I'm not like that. But they weren't cruel. We might imagine it. They weren't careless. They were busy. They were being careful. They were being responsible. They had places to be and their own safety to consider. Which sounds a lot like us a lot of the time. Busy, careful, responsible. And then comes the shock of the story, right? This story of the Good Samaritan. And remember, Samaritans and Judeans, oil and water, right? They literally would cross on the other side of the road so that they didn't see one another, so they didn't have to spend time with one another. They would tell stories about one another as if they were the boogeyman in the night. They would clutch their purse a little closer as they walked by them in town. And it's the Samaritan, says Jesus, who stops. The Samaritan who treats the man with kindness and cares for his wounds. And Jesus asked, who was the neighbor? And the answer is obvious. The man says, the one who showed mercy. Notice in this story that the Samaritan didn't start as a neighbor, he became a neighbor. Neighboring can be a verb. We neighbor people. We become their neighbor when we show them mercy, says Jesus. The Samaritan, despite the lawyer's desire, is the one who shows mercy. Martin Luther King once preached on this story. And he's one of the theologians that has really been in my head for the last 5 years, and King's theology is shaping how we talk about this Kingdom of God series. And at the end of his life, in that last week of his life, King preached a sermon called I've Been to the Mountaintop. And he said this, he was preaching on the Good Samaritan. He said, the first question the priest and the Levite asked was, if I stop and help this man, what will happen to me? What will happen to me? But the Good Samaritan reverses the question and asks instead, if I do not stop, what will happen to this man? If I do not stop, what will happen to this man? The priest and the Levite asked the question that you and I have often been trained to ask, the question of responsibility, of self-preservation, the question of where is the limit of my love? Carefulness. The Samaritan asks the question of compassion. And in doing that, he becomes the neighbor by asking the question of compassion and mercy. Because mercy begins with the person right in front of you. In his case, it was the man on the side of the road. So, Dr. King, another theologian, has shaped my theology, two people really over the last 5 years. And you've heard of us talk about MLK, but the other is Pastor Fred Rogers. And if you, like me, grew up with Fred Rogers, you might not have realized that he was a pastor. He was ordained in the Presbyterian Church USA, and his ministry was to preach good news to children through television. It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood. The way that we experienced Fred was his ministry. Fred Rogers once said something about love. He said, to love someone is to strive to accept that person exactly as they are right now. Say that again. To love someone is to strive to accept them exactly as they are right now. It is not fixing people. It is not saving people. Love is not approving of everything they do. Love is not waiting until they improve in order to love them. Love is striving to accept them as they are right now. It begins with recognition that the other person is a human being, that the other person is a child of God, that the other person is beloved. Everyone else on that day saw a problem, but the Samaritan saw a person, a child of God. To love someone is to strive to accept them exactly the way they are. But what does that look like? Really, like beyond it's a great idea to love everyone just as they are, what does that look like for us? Looks like noticing the people who are invisible in our world. Maybe the coworker who always eats alone, or the classmate who eats alone. Looks like noticing the person who is new to our church and community and inviting them in. Looks like paying attention when your neighbor is going through grief, whether from the loss of a loved one or some other struggle in their lives. It looks like remembering that the children and the adults in Iran and in Gaza and Sudan are also children of God and beloved. Sometimes mercy is as simple as saying, I see you. All right, so I lied a little. Pastors lie sometimes. 3 theologians who have shaped my views over the last 5 years. Dr. Martin Luther King, Pastor Fred Rogers, and St. Ted of Richmond. Ted Lasso, a great show if you've never watched it. And in one of my favorite episodes, folks are making assumptions about Ted, as they often have done, because he is an American in England. They're making assumptions like British folks can play darts better than him, and Ted goes on to tell a story about how he grew up playing darts his whole life, winning the competition because people made assumptions about what he knows and what he does not. And he ends the scene by saying that we are, he doesn't use these words, we are invited to be curious and not judgmental. Be curious, not judgmental, because mercy begins with the person right in front of you. And we can only begin with that person right in front of us when we have learned to see them without judgment, to ask a question, to listen to their story, to resist the urge to label them, to classify them, to put them in a neat little silo and instead see them for who they are, to cross boundaries, maybe by showing kindness to someone who we think might not deserve it, maybe by striking up a conversation with someone we disagree with on important issues, maybe by welcoming someone who is socially awkward or different than us, maybe by refusing to join in ridicule and belittling of others. Compassion sometimes even arrives as inconvenience. As we walk down the Jericho Road, it can seem irresponsible, helping someone who is stranding, taking time out of our schedule, even though we have places to be, to listen to somebody's story, to slow down for someone in distress. The Samaritan did not change the world that day, but he changed the world for one man, for one person, for one beloved child of God. And that's where the kingdom begins. Mercy begins with the person right in front of you. So if we're honest, you and I, most of the time we are not the Samaritan. Most of the times we're the ones walking past. Not because we're cruel or bad people. We're busy. We're distracted. We're overwhelmed. We're careful and responsible. Jesus doesn't tell this story to shame us, because Jesus is not in the shame business. He tells the story to invite us into a different way of living, to invite us into a new way of living, into a community, into the kingdom of God that we call the beloved community. And it's not built, this beloved community, by great speeches or sermons. It grows through small acts of mercy, wounds that are bandaged, strangers that are welcomed, boundaries that are crossed. Every act of compassion and mercy that we take makes the kingdom of God visible in the world that we live in right now. And so it is that the road to Jericho runs through our daily lives. It's always someone lying by the side of the road, usually not literally, although occasionally that's the case. Maybe it's just someone who is lonely or wounded, overlooked or dismissed. And every day we face the same question. Will we pass by or will we stop? Because mercy begins with the person right in front of us. And so it is that every time that we choose mercy over indifference, every time we accept someone exactly as they are, every time that we are curious instead of judgmental, every time we choose compassion instead of our routines, we take one small step toward the dream that Jesus calls the kingdom of God. One small step toward the kingdom of God, which is a beloved community here among us now.